It's going to be a series, matter of fact, for the next 3 Sundays, and this is part 1. And I've just titled the series, The Table. And part 1 today is Come to the Table, the invitation. You see what's unique that's about to happen this week, and it's God's timing. This is something that I've been thinking about for a while. There's a song out called Come to the Table, and since I first heard it, it's been ministering to my heart, and I've been saying, God, I would like to preach a message and have that song involved somehow. And then this week, all of a sudden, He began to just pour into my heart, and once again, just like our last little 2-part series, just if I could turn back time, that happened the weekend of turning back time. We are about to be approaching a table this week. You see, Thanksgiving is coming up. Some people have already celebrated it because of people's schedules and so forth. And some will be scheduling it today and tomorrow in the next few days. And some might even extend to next week. But the Thanksgiving holiday, of all holidays, we like to eat at all holidays. But the one thing that separates Thanksgiving from the other holidays is it is really focused around one thing. That's the table. It ain't a manger. It ain't a cross. It's not an Easter basket. It's not a bag of trick-or-treat candy. It's not about chocolate-covered hearts. It's about a table. Make no bones about it, pardon the pun. Thanksgiving ain't nothing but about food. That table of food. When I said Thanksgiving, you're picturing turkey and dressing and ham and all the things that go along with it. It is food from beginning to end. And there will be that moment on Thanksgiving Day. While the men maybe are doing a lot of things, anywhere from maybe hunting or fishing or watching football, whatever the time frame is of getting the table ready, that there will come a call, come to the table. It is ready. I read something the other day, and it was by a lady named Irma Brombeck. Everybody remember her and all of her household hints and everything? She said, I wonder if there's a coincidence in this. It takes 18 hours. 18 hours to produce a full Thanksgiving meal. And approximately 12 to 15 minutes to eat it, which is about the length of halftime of a football game. I don't know. The song I just played from Zach Williams, more famous for Chain Breaker than maybe a lot of his other songs, says, bring it all to the table. You see, because even though it may not be true in every family, the one thing about Thanksgiving, it brings everyone together. It's family. And family have some issues. Family has some baggage. Family has some drama. And sometimes we dread that part of it, but it might be the only time that everybody gets together. Almost like reunions. It's sort of sad when people say, well, the only reason I'm going is because so-and-so may die and not be here next year. Sometimes at Thanksgiving, one person prepares everything, and then sometimes everybody has certain dishes that they maybe are known for or been asked to bring. And so the thing is you know what? Everybody brings something to the table. When you come to this house of God, you're bringing something in here with you. I pray it's Jesus and a spirit of Christ-likeness. Not everybody does. Some people have attitude when they go to church. Some people are hypocrites. Some people have baggage. Some people have problems and addictions. But you know what we do as a church? We say, bring it to the table. Bring it here. We want you to be seated at this table. No matter what you're carrying, no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're struggling with, this table is not set for the redeemed only. I'm thankful for that because there was one time that I lived among the unredeemed. But I found a place at the table. So as we gather family around the table, and we know they bring a lot of things with that, I ask you this morning, what do you bring to the table? Think about that a moment. You see, because the table, as the first part of that video I put together for you this morning, it's more than just a place to eat. The table in its correct form and used the correct way is a place of relationship. It's a place of fellowship. It's a place of sharing. But back to the original thought is, Thanksgiving's table is all about eating. And Christians love to eat as much as anybody else. You know, when we say we're going to have an eating at church, our attendance usually doubles. I mean, that's not coincidence. Oh, I just happened to show up today. Yeah, because we put it on Facebook, we was eating. People love to eat. They love to gather around food, and Christians love to eat. And now, after putting this message together, and like I said, I start off with one message, and God turned it into three, and it's just Him in His unique ways. But anyways, we start off with this one. I know why we like to eat so much. That's one thing about studying the Bible. You find out things, little-known facts you didn't pay attention to. You know why we like to eat so much? We get it from our Father. Do you know most of the things that happen in your life, good or bad, whether it's abilities or talents or gifts or character attributes, most of them are passed down from your parents? I have always told my kids, every trophy, every award they got is just as much mine as it is theirs. It came from my genes and my loins. If I didn't have it, it wouldn't have got passed on to them. It may be recessive. I mean, so far back in a dark corner, you can't find it in me, but it is buried in there somewhere. And we get this because of our Father. Now, you might say, well, what are you talking about, Pastor? You really sort of sound a little bit different today. How do we get this from our Father? I read something, and it was titled this. It was some commentators put this together, and it was said, how Jesus ate his way through the Gospels. I said, wow, that's strange, but listen to what this commentary said. Ever noticed how many of Jesus' meals are in the Gospels? Meals feature so prominently in the Gospels that many of us have commented Jesus ate his way through the Gospels. Jesus would reveal the kingdom as he shared meals with others. The Last Supper and the feeding of the 5,000 are recorded in all four Gospels. Jesus' meal with Matthew or Levi, the tax collector, and his friends is found in 3 of the Gospels. John is the only one that omits it. Then when you add the feeding of the 4,000, which is found in both Mark and Matthew, together these are 4 meals, but we find them in 13 passages in the New Testament. But there's many more than that. Meals are particularly prominent in Luke's Gospel. It is safe to say that throughout Luke's Gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. My kind of guy. Pastor, are you sure? Well, let's just follow some. I'm going to read these real quick. Later, if you want more information, you can. In Luke chapter 5, Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners at the home of Levi. That's in Luke chapter 5. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus is anointed by a woman in the home of Simon the Pharisee during a meal. In Luke chapter 9, Jesus feeds the 5,000. Luke chapter 10, Jesus eats in the home of Mary and Martha. Luke chapter 11, Pharisees invite him to eat with them. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus shares a parable about the banquet in which he urges people to invite the poor rather than their friends. In Luke 19, a presumed meal with Zacchaeus. In Luke 22, we read about the account of the Last Supper. Luke 24, he's eating a meal with the 2 men from Emmaus. So you can see why scholars have said Jesus ate his way through the Gospels. In Luke 7, one of those I mentioned to you a while ago, because of this, it drew the attention of some people. And this is what we see. It says in Luke chapter 7, verse 34, the Pharisees said this, "The Son of Man has come eating and drinking. And you say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." You see, there's one thing that's amazing about Jesus' meals: who he chose to eat with. I've been to church potlucks all my life since I was a kid. And one thing I've always heard growing up, around that table sometimes, didn't matter when I was a little kid and we were going to churches way up north or Even here at this place, you hear people say, who made that? Who brought that? And if nobody knows, it's like, I ain't going to touch it. It might be the best thing. I think it's Hebrews that says, be careful to entertain strangers, because thereby some have entertained angels unawares. It might be the best thing you've never tasted. But sometimes we have these thoughts about that, and we might say who we're going to eat with. What if somebody invited you to their home? We would tend to want to go to the people that we might think would be more like us. Yet Jesus was found in strange company in almost every single time it mentions one of his meals. And here it says, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Because who was at the house of Matthew? A bunch of tax collectors and a bunch of sinners. So you know what? I can imagine there was some ungodly things going on at that house. You know one thing that's funny? People still acted like people in the company of Jesus. You know, sometimes if people know I'm a pastor, they change their behavior for me. But Jesus was willing to be with people who were just people. Social boundaries were very important in the first century Israel. And meals were the way that social boundaries were maintained and displayed. Every pious Jew knew who they could eat with and who they couldn't eat with. Jesus' choice of dinner partners demonstrated an alarming disregard for the laws of purity and social morality. Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners. Mark 2, verse 15 says this, as he sat down in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were also sitting with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. I don't know about you, but I find it interesting that the people Matthew chose to associate with. You see, you want to know where the world feels most comfortable today? They don't feel comfortable sitting next to you in your pews. They feel comfortable saddled up on a bar stool with their friends. They feel comfortable sitting in the living room with their friends and watching things that we would say, oh, they shouldn't be watching. They feel comfortable with others like them. And Jesus was invited to a meal, and we shouldn't find it strange that there was a bunch of sinners gathered there. A lot of times people would say, well, Christians have no place being in those kinds of places. If sinners are there, I think sometimes Christians need to be there. How are they going to know any different? How are they ever going to see the light if the light's not represented in the dark places where they're at? We shouldn't be surprised when sinners gather other sinners around them. Why? Because they feel accepted among their brothers and sisters. They feel like they can be themselves there. It shouldn't be a surprise that these people that feel cut off from society, that they choose to be lonely and set apart together. But it's also interesting to note that we don't find Jesus eating in the temple and in the homes of the Christians. He decides, I'm going to eat with them. Why? And one of the other times it mentions about Jesus' many visits to the restaurant field in his day was because he said, you know what? I didn't come to call the righteous to repentance. It's not the well that need a physician, it's the doctor. So I have to go to the sick, the infirmed, the hurting, the struggling, those that are lonely and despair. That's where I got to go. And if they're gathered in this house eating, you're going to find me sitting there right with them. To be that example, to share my love, to be a source of hope. But in this verse it says, for there were many who followed him. The many who followed is referring to even more sinners. I don't think you've grasped this. Sinners loved to be in the presence of Jesus. They followed him everywhere. The majority of the throngs around Jesus was not the religious people. They despised him. It was the sinners, the outcasts. And yet they loved being around Jesus. How many sinners love being around you? You see, the reason is that they don't want to sometimes is because we're too churchy. If we're the real Jesus, You know, real Jesus isn't always pointing the finger. He's there to love. He's there to care. He's there to minister. And who's going to listen best? The one that is being scolded all the time, or the one that's being embraced? Sinners love Jesus. They love to be around him. But yet, in this day and time, sinners don't like the church. There's a problem there then. We're not being enough like Jesus, and we're being too much like Pharisees and Sadducees. If the sinners, you see, the sinners despise the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but they love Jesus. Sinners should love the church if we are the right Jesus. And so Jesus is found at all these tables. So let's talk a little bit about who's invited to this table. The invitation, the title of today's message is Come to the Table. Zach Williams was singing, Bring it all to the table. It doesn't matter who you are or what baggage you've got. Jesus is saying, come to my table. I've got a place for you. We're real picky about who comes to our house and eat. We're not just going to let anybody come sit at our table, yet Jesus invites the outcast. Let's see, Luke chapter 14. I'm going to read verses 15 through 24 for you here today to find out who's invited to this table. And what you need to understand is this church, and every church that claims to be children of God, they represent the table of God. And these chairs represent a place at that table. But yet do many of the churches today reach out to these kind of people? There's a lot of people that through the years that I've been pastor here, one of the reasons, and I'm going to commend you this morning, in case you're always thinking I'm getting on your toes, I'm going to commend you this morning. There's a lot of people that have came to this church in the 7 years that I've been a pastor have came strictly because they said they went to other places, but they never felt welcomed. They might have been treated nice. They might have been acknowledged, but there was this sense they just really weren't part of the family and would never be welcomed as part of the family because of who they were, where they've been, what their past was, or what they still were today. I don't care if you're still taking drugs, if you're still finding yourself in a drunken stupor every day, you're welcome here. Because Jesus would welcome you here. And you know what's the sad part of this on the flip coin? You know when I'm getting serious and stuff when this starts coming off. Amber wants it, she's cold. Because everybody knows you can't fight in a jacket and sleeves, so we getting ready to tussle now. You know what upsets me about it? I know there's people in this community that will not come to this church because of some of the people we allow to come to this church. Let me tell you real quick, I would rather have those that are willing to come than the ones that think they're too self-righteous to hang around the kind of people that God says come to my table. We may never bust out at the seams because people come and they say, oh, I didn't know so-and-so went there. We need to go where the people feel they can be in front of Jesus. If sinners were welcomed around Jesus and loved to be around Jesus, the church can be no different. And if somebody thinks they're too self-righteous to sit next to a shoulder of somebody like that, I would rather have the other person. We got to have the heart of Jesus. So who's invited? I never did read it yet, did I? Okay. Starting at verse 15. Now when one of those who sat at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, Blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. Then he said to him, he being Jesus, a certain man gave a great supper and invited many. And he sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, Come, for all things are now ready. But they all with one accord began to make excuses. The first said to him, I have bought a piece of ground and I must go and see it. I ask that you would let me be excused. Another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to test them. I ask you to have me excused. Still another said, I have married a wife and therefore I cannot come. Dustin married a wife, and he's here with his wife today. Congratulations, Dustin. So that servant came and reported these things to his master, verse 21. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city and bring in here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind." The outcast, the ones no one wants. The ones I've invited have said, given me excuses and don't want to be there. It made him mad. You see, you are the servant also that's required to go out and be telling other people there's room at this table for you. How are they going to know if they aren't told? When you go into a town you've never been into before, or you're not familiar with things, you begin to search out through Google and different avenues of, or maybe asking friends and family, where's a good place to eat? And we're quick to tell them. We should be those that are giving those out there an invitation to come to the table and eat. It says, go on and says, verse 22, and the servant said, "Master, it is done as you've commanded. I've already done that, and there's still more room here." Then the master said to the servant, "Well, then go out into the highways and into the hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say unto you, none of those men who are invited shall taste of my supper." Who's invited to Jesus' table? Who would be invited to the president's table? Who would be invited to LeBron James' table? We have one of our people, our church secretaries in Boston, because she's a Patriots fan. Who would be invited to Tom Brady's table? You ain't on the list, I can guarantee you that. You ain't even on the radar. But who's on the list? To the Son of God, the one who gave his life for us, the one who took a beating and was bruised and had hair plucked out and said, "I'm going to do this for you." Who would be invited to him? The one who rules the universe, the one who created everything, and by him all things consist. It must be the elect that's chosen to come to his table. Surely not me. Surely not you. The Pharisees are invited to his table. The sinners, the ungodly, the tax collectors, the outcast, the dregs of society. What is dregs? You ever drink a cup of coffee and the grounds are in the bottom, or you drink something and all that stuff? That's the dregs that form at the bottom, the part you can't handle. Those get a special invitation. Come to my table. I love you. I care for you. You know who else is invited to the table? The leper. You have to understand how the leper was treated in that day and time. I mean, literally, the lepers were required by law when they walked down the street to holler out that fact, weren't they, John? Leper! Leper! So people could get out of their way. They weren't allowed to just go into the common marketplace and partake of normal activities. They most of the time were pushed outside the city limits to live in filth and scum by themselves. No doctors to see them. Body parts and extremities falling off. Nasty ooziness from the sickening part of the leprosy disease. Don't dare get close to a leper, and definitely don't touch them. Do you know Jesus would touch the leper? But something I found interesting, it just said it so casually that I wondered why more hasn't been said about it. But if you were here last week, we were talking about Mary and Martha. And I told you the times when Jesus was found. Mary was found at Jesus' feet. There were 3 different times. At the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Then later on at Jesus' feet, pouring perfume on his feet and wiping his feet. And then later on, at the time when Lazarus had died. The time she poured the oil on his feet, we find that in Mark 14:3. And just casually, it says this at the beginning of that. In the home of Simon the leper. What do you find in the home of Simon the leper? Jesus. Sitting in his house, sitting at his table, eating with him, fellowshipping with him. In the house of Simon the leper. And that's where Mary finds him and begins to worship him and adore him. That's who's invited to the table of Jesus. You don't see the kings, you don't see the rulers, you don't see the high priests, you don't see the chief priests. Going a little bit more about this table from some historical commentaries that I read. Sitting at Matthew's dinner table, Jesus may have broken some social taboos, but his presence there shows that he looked beyond the culture to people's hearts. Whereas the Pharisees, or church people, wrote people off simply because of their profession or their past. Jesus looked past all that and saw their need. I read that statement and I was reminded of a song that was one of those songs that ministered to me so much in my life, and it's a song that maybe you need to look up because you're not perfect, and the devil's going to hammer you when you mess up and screw up and have life all backwards. And you know there's sin there, and you know you're doing wrong, and you're struggling. And the song says, he looked beyond my fault and saw my need. What's wrong with our eyes that we can't do that? I wish we could come to church and we could get special Christian glasses. Change your perspective on everything. You see, there's something you can get in glasses that's called polarity, and it changes images and stuff. Maybe if we began to look at everybody and no longer seen their issues, no longer seen the drama or the baggage. Maybe if we had special hearing aids that we wouldn't always hear the things that are being said. And we could somehow bypass that, maybe like blinders that directed us straight to the heart, straight to the soul, straight to the character, the source. I dare say every church would be changed. But you see, when we only see the fault, we don't ever look for the remedy, because fault finders are finger pointers. All the time we needed the finger pointed at us. But it says Jesus looked past all that and saw their need. Unlike the Pharisees, Jesus didn't require people to change before coming to him. He sought them out, he met them where they were at, and he always extended them grace. Change would come to those who accepted Christ, but it would be from the inside out. Not everybody that comes to the table is going to enjoy it. Not everybody's going to want to come again. But we extend it to everybody every time we can. And then it's up to them to decide to accept and receive that grace or not. Will it happen that day, that week, that month, that year? I don't know. If the Lord has me to minister here for 25 years and somebody that started coming at the day one of my ministry and they didn't change till the last day that I presented my last message here and they got saved, it would have been worth it. Even though it took them 25 years to change. The time schedule's not up to me. My thing is to make them feel comfortable in the house of God, that there's a place at the table, because when they are sitting at the table, they're going to hear my Jesus talk. And Jesus can change people. But in the ancient world, to share the table with another person was making a social statement, not only about your guest, but about yourself. As long as I'm pastor, New Life Church is going to be making a social statement, not only about ourselves, but about our guests. They're welcome at the table of Jesus. What does it cost, Pastor? You know, whenever I go out for a meal, it costs. How many of you go to a restaurant sometimes and get water? Raise your hands. That's good. The reality is, for half of you, it's not a healthy choice. It's a financial choice. Because, hey, now, we getting real in here. It's okay. You're welcome at my table. Matter of fact, I'm more apt to buy your meal if you get water. No. Because you go in there and drinks are like $2.50 a piece. You got 4 or 5 people. You're looking at $25. You know, I mean, not $25. You're looking at $12, $15 just for drinks. Tea, $2.50. You know, I mean, that, or sometimes $3. I'll drink water and go buy a $1 Coke at the convenience store on the way home if I'm that thirsty for a Coke. And so if you got 4 people to feed and you can just, bam, knock $12 off that bill by drinking water, I learned real quick. The waitress come on, what can I get you to drink? We all having water. But, no buts. That money coming, I was going to say back by my butt, I shouldn't have said that. That money coming out of this pocket, you're getting water. That $12, we can go to Mickey D's in the morning and eat breakfast. What does it cost? Surely to sit at the table of the one and only Jesus Christ must cost a lot. You see, the parable that I read a while ago, when that certain man wanted the guests to come, he covered the cost. Jesus has covered your cost to sit at the table. And you can eat and drink to your heart's content. He's paid it for us. So then that brings us to the next topic. Well, what they got? You know, some of us are picky eaters. What are we going to get to eat? Have you ever heard this thing about, you know, if you're in prison or jail, they should only serve them what? Bread and water. How many of you ever heard that saying? You know, hey, this is bread and water. You know what the king serves? Bread and water! John 6:35, then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. You see, spiritually speaking, the best thing for you is bread. Now, I seen a meme the other day. I think Maggie shared it. Said something to the fact, hey, all you people, stop saying bread's for you, bad for you, because, you know, everybody says all the carbohydrates and all these things, and it adds fat, turns to sugar, blah, blah, blah. Said, Jesus said, I'm the bread of life, not the broccoli of life. And I'm not your daily kale or something like that, so it's okay to eat the spiritual bread. But this bread, he says, that will never go hungry. There's a hunger in your soul and in your center of man that there's only one thing that can satisfy it. And Jesus says, I got plenty of it at my table. It's the bread. The bread, and it will cause you to be free from any hunger the rest of your life. And then in John 14:13, it says this, Jesus answered and said to her, whoever drinks of this water, good time to take a drink. Looks like it was part of my message. Whoever drinks this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give will never thirst again. And that water I give will become in them a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. When they come to the table, they see music, they see a preacher speaking, they hear announcements, they see money passing the plate. It looks like all they got is bread and water. But when I go out there in my world, in my social life, if it's into drinking or drugs or the different things that the ungodly get involved with, it looks like the world serving them T-bone steaks, desserts. And I go to church and he says, here, you want some bread and water? It don't look like much. Oh, but once you taste it, once you eat of that bread and drink of that water, you begin to turn your nose up at that world stuff. It has a smell to it. It's That's what you need this morning. It doesn't look like much, and when you come to the table, Jesus says, I've got you bread and water. But I've got so much more out there that will satisfy my taste buds. Because we're like children. Jordan, you hungry? Yes. What you want? Candy? It don't matter what time of day. She can just get out of the bed. Candy? A sucker? That's her favorite right now, suckers. You see, the flesh side of us wants to get the candy and the suckers. And the sad thing is there's a lot of churches that provide that. Now, believe me, I'll let you get your licks on a sucker. I'll feed you some candy sometimes. But every once in a while, the plate's going to be passed. And it ain't going to be a bottle of milk. It's going to be a steak. It's going to be some meat of the Word. There's a whole other message in all that. And that comes straight from the gospel. But it says there comes a time you got to stop nursing and drinking milk and eating the Word of God. So occasionally, some people aren't ready for the Word, but I still have to give you the meat of the gospel. So you learn to chew on it and digest it a little bit. But bread and water, let me go on. Also available on the menu. We find it through this bread and water. And that's why Jesus has come to this table, because within the bread, within the nourishment, you see, everything we eat nourishes us. And the nourishment of His bread and water brings you life, brings you peace, brings you joy, gives you healing, brings comfort, and you find a friend. All in bread and water. Some of you this morning, you might be saying this, well, I understand all that's at that table, but I don't know if I can bring myself to come to that table. You see, sometimes in our life, maybe we've been so hurt. Maybe it's been such a struggle. Maybe we've distanced ourselves so far from the Lord that we feel we're living in a wilderness area. We're out in the desert. We're in a place where we can't get to that table. Even though I know the Master's bidding me come to the table, I just don't know if I can get there. There's things I don't know if I can get past. There's things that are blocking me, and the journey seems so long. In Psalm 78, we find a discourse of God's people. And in that discourse, we find out that God had provided so many things for them, even to the point of when they had gotten thirsty, He brought water from a rock. And the people were thankful for this. But they said something in Psalm 78:19 that a multitude of these people began to say, because now they were having another need. They said this, can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Oh, I know He delivered us in the Red Sea, and He delivered us out of Egypt, and He's brought us water out of a rock, but can He bring us a table and feed us in the wilderness? And then the scriptures go on, and it talks about how He provided the manna, and then He provided the quail. He later rebuked them because this still didn't satisfy them, but the idea was God can't reach us here. God can't bring a table to this place. You need to know, wherever you're at, if you can't get to Him, He's going to bring the table to you. That's good. Fist bump. He will bring the table to you. You are without excuse. No matter where you're at, the invitation's there. Come to the table. Stop hurting. Stop struggling. Stop being alone. Stop doing this on your own. Come and sit at my table. And if you can't come to me, I will bring it to you. Most of these meals that Jesus was at, He went to their house. You're never too far from help. I'm getting close to closing. Real close, according to the clock. I want to say a story, and then I got a video to show, and then we're going to wrap this up this morning. It says, once upon a time, there was a young man who had a fast car. And he picked up his best friend for a night out. On the way home, he drove a little too fast. He lost control, ran off the road right into a tree. The young man survived, but his best friend died. At the funeral, the young boy, guilt-ridden since he was driving, went over to his best friend's father and just buried himself into his arms and began to cry. I killed your son. I killed your son. The father stood there for a moment and hugging him, and while the boy sobbed, began to give him words of pardon. And to prove it was more than just words, he invited him to come to his house for a meal. And that meal turned into many, many meals. Yet the young boy that had been driving never took a bite at any one of those dinners without first remembering his friend and being amazed at the father's goodness. Today, we're responsible of the same thing. We've killed God's Son. How? Our sin? Our sin is responsible for the death of God's Son. And just like the father in his story, he says, but you know what? I forgive you. Would you mind coming to my house? Sitting at my table. Share of me. Let me share into you. Now I want to show you the video that it's a song by Sidewalk Prophets that spurred this.